Guys, this is Mr. V over here doing a book review today for A World Undone, the story of the Great War from 1914 to 1918 by G.J. Meyer. The Great War, or is more commonly known as World War I, took place between 1914 to 1918, and this is a great one-volume book about that war. I had never read anything on World War I. I knew just a little bit here and there, but this was a great book to inform me about the Great War, or the World War I. And if you're on the fence about if you want to read the book, I would say to read the introduction. His introduction was great. He talks about why he wrote the book, and it makes you want to read the book. One thing that he talks about in the introduction is how there are many books on World War One, but many of them are multiple volumes, and many of them are somewhat scholarly. So it can be tough to read a scholarly multi-volume book, and it can become boring. Whereas this book was meant for the masses, which was great because it was an easy writing style, and he's not trying to break any new ground. He is basically just telling you what happened. Um, but he's also doing it in a very easy and to understand way, and also a very entertaining way. The most important thing about the book is he comes across as just unbiased. Again, he is just telling you what happened. So that's why it is a great book. But understand that while it is a great book, it does take time to read. You can see there are 700 pages, so it is a long book. But there are also many names, many events, there's some analysis. So while doing it, I did not just speed read it. I definitely took my time on doing it, and I am glad I did. So this book is a great book because, again, it's a one-volume version, but he gives great references. At the very front of the book, he gives you a chronological order of all the major events if you need to go back through that. But he also gives you maps, which are great to reference because he gives you maps in the east, maps in the west, so you can see that, and it helps seeing the maps while doing it. There's also many pictures throughout the book, so it's fun or great seeing help or very helpful also seeing those pictures. And I would say one of the best things for his references is he gives you references to all the major people at the front of the book. The very front of the book gives you a list of all the major people because there are so many names in this book. There's so many countries involved, but so sometimes you are forgetting when you read. So that reference thing helps you because then you did not need to use the internet, didn't need to take notes, anything like that. So that really helped. And he just gives you great descriptions of what is going on during the war because there are so many moving pieces to start the war. The war started because of a fairly minor event, but there are so many other moving pieces behind that. And throughout the war, there are so many moving pieces because so many countries are involved. And that's why it is great that he gives great descriptions, but that he does it in a very easy to read and entertaining format. But I think that was because he had a great writing style for so many reasons. First, it didn't feel like I was ever reading a textbook. It just, came across very well because he keeps you interested. And that is very important because some history books can become boring. Some authors are just boring. And that's why many people don't read history. But he was more entertaining, yet he was not confusing or overwhelming because there was a lot of moving pieces in this. As I said, there's many countries and people involved, and this is all happening at the same time. There's a war going on in the East and the West and the South all at the same time. Yet I never felt overwhelmed. So he just does a great job of doing all that. I mean, sometimes I did need the references at the front of the book, but still, he does a great job of kind of just like putting it all together while you're reading it, so you did not feel overwhelmed. And I think this is also because he gave you great chapter length. He just gave you the right amount of information for you to process, so you could even take a step back and like think about it for a little bit. But you didn't have to like read for like 2 hours and not finish a chapter, not finish a certain battle, anything like that. So he just gave you the right amount without going too far in depth, which is very, very important. Another great thing he did, which is different than other books from what I read, is that he gives in between each chapter, he gives you what's called like a background chapter. And that is basically just the history of some of the countries involved, or some of the leaders involved, or some of the technological advances that happened up to that point. And that helps you when you're going into it to know why this was a revolutionary war in terms of what turned into a great war, but why it was so groundbreaking, why this war happened. And you just learn a lot of extra facts and stories for other countries. And I think it is important to know some of the other leaders involved or why extra things are happening at that time. So that was really great. And overall, he just does a great job of presenting the information because this was a very groundbreaking war. It turned into a world war, World War One, so a lot of people will remember this forever. But it was a groundbreaking war because a lot of new weapons were being used. Um, the weapons developed at a very slow pace for most of civilization, but from like the late 1800s on, they just developed at a crazy, like phenomenal speed. But like this one, what happened was the ways to manufacture metal became very easy, and they made it to where every gun could be manufactured the exact same. So not as many guns were misfiring anymore as compared to like the early 1800s or before. And they also had developed the machine gun just a few years prior to it. They had used it in a few smaller wars, but this was the first major war, like big time war that it got used on, and it became like just so much deadlier because the machine guns just caused the mowing down of enemy lines. It just became way too easy to shoot everyone down, and this was on both sides, which then caused a stalemate because both sides were just, it was too easy just to mow the whole enemy line down. And that's why it's a stalemate, and it is sad to read because stalemates are tough, where basically each side is moving just a little bit back and forth, and you see how the generals treated their soldiers like action figures, or you could even say in modern day they treat them like video games. That they didn't care that, oh, we know we're going to lose 100,000 easily just to move a few yards forward. It is pretty brutal when you see some of their uh, stuff that they're like, okay, we'll just move a little bit, take over this one small area, and we'll lose 150,000, and they didn't care, and just how much. And it wasn't even like they were taking over a whole country while doing it. It was like they were just moving very, very little, which is why this is considered one of the bloodiest wars in history. Depending on what statistics you go by, anywhere from 15 to 40 million people died. But when you include civilians, it is 40 million. But it is not only one of the bloodiest, it is also one of the most brutal because the enemy lines didn't move much. It wasn't like some of the other wars where they lose a lot of people, but there is a lot of like a country gets taken over or something like that. This one, very little happened. There was, or not very little happened. There's a lot happening, but there was very little progress from each side. One side would move forward like a mile, then they would move back, and then it's just moving on both. It was the east and the west side of Europe. So it was just like very little, and north and south too. And it was just very little movement because it would move, then move back. And that's what a stalemate was. So you could just see why it was so brutal. And I think that World War One is often overlooked. A lot of people quote World War One, but don't know much about it. And that's why I think it's a very overlooked war. And it's overlooked because of World War Two. World War Two happened just 2 decades later. And also a lot more events happened in World War Two. But um, it is just, again, an overlooked war. And that's why I think it is a very interesting war because you can also see while World War Two was a lot more happening and much more impactful, you can see how the like framework of World War Two was starting at the end of World War One. You can already see some of the things starting and why it led to another world war, and that's what makes World War One so interesting. And the book just clearly shows that. Now, if you guys are considering reading it, one thing you should consider: there's one really tough aspect to this book, and that is how many names are involved. There are so many names involved, and you don't remember who was for what force at times. That is why it is great he gives you that reference in the beginning of the book. But there are just so many generals and people below the generals from so many sides, because there's the Germans, there's the French, there's the Russians, there's the British, there's the Austrians, there's the Italians, there's the Hungarians, there's the Turkish. There's just so many different sides battling. So that's why there's just so many names, but that's also why the references at the front help so much. But just be aware of that before going in. Don't think you're going to just speed read through this whole thing. But if you guys take the time, this is a great book. I took my time and it was definitely worth it. It's worth knowing, how brutal war can be. And it really shows that. And you can see the horrors of war. But you also see why this war was so bad because of the stalemate aspect and how all sides messed up so badly. Because they just kept losing a ton of people for so little gain, and it really shows that. But it's also interesting to see how the framework for World War II started at the end of this war, and you can see it, and you can see why World War II started because of it. So if you guys are considering it, I would highly recommend the book. Now, if you guys have any questions, you guys have any comments, please post it in the comment section below because I love hearing your comments. If you guys like the book review today, hit the subscribe button. I always upload multiple different types of book reviews, but thank you for watching my book review today. This is Mr. V. Go enjoy reading.